So instead of doing this as a live demo and trying to find a window where nobody else is doing anything more interesting, I just decided to just record this, and then you can watch it whenever you want. So this is the topic, do's and don'ts of polka dots. And those of you who have taken classes with me in person, you know that I love my little lectures before we start. So I made some sample beads here. And the first question, so you see that I was going for green polka dots. So how can you make green polka dots? There's a variety of options. So I show you the first one, this one here. And what this is, so all my beads are based on black, because I always like the contrast. I like the way that black, the way it melts. So most of my small beads are based on black. So I have a black base, and I made green dots. So I made directly the dots on the bead in green. Then I poked them, and then I put some clear on top for trapping the bubbles. So I'm gonna hold this a little bit closer. That's a bad poke. And so let's see how close I can get. So this really is honestly my least favorite version of doing this. And what you can see is like this line around, and that is when you put clear on top of an opaque color, it doesn't blend in. It literally sits there and creates that borderline that to me kind of distracts from the beauty of the dot with the hole. So doing a green, and also, let's see, maybe I can get a little bit closer. What happens is when you put clear on top of an opaque color, especially if it's a color that is as soft as the pea green, it kind of just looks blah. You know, it takes even away from the shade of the green. So if this would be, you know, another design, I just hardly ever put clear or a transparent color on top of an opaque color. So this one here we throw away. And let's see the next one. I have to see what I can identify. Oh, this one here. So what I did here is a whole different story. It's nice when I have not having the flame there. So this is a white dot underneath. Then I poke the white, and then I put transparent green on top. Like I think it was you know, one of these kind of transparent light green. And what's wrong with that? Well, it's not as bad as the opaque green, but there's just no real depth to the dot. You can see that it's kind of almost like a little dot in there, more so than a bubble. So white with transparent green on top. Nope, I'm going to throw this one out too. Well, of course I'm not going to throwing them out, but so my version, my preferred version, is this one here, and you can immediately see how the dot is like so much more impactful. I mean, this is a very serious dot, serious bubble. So this is made with a white base, and then I put a transparent clear green on top of that white. Then I poke that and put the clear on top. So this is kind of what we want to go for. And I have another variation on that. Let's see. It's funny, you know, you make a bead, and then sometimes just looking at the bead, it's hard to tell what you did. But you can see that kind of greenish, tealish hint in the center, especially with these two. So I just added a little color just to give it some more oomph, you know. So this is probably my favorite. So what we have to do is of course I'm going to make a sample bead, but the first step is the question of how do you get your white dots on top of the black, and how does this, you know, how does this influence the way that you can post your green. So these beads are both just a black bead with the white dot on top and nothing else. So this would be the starter bead. And the difference between these two beads is you can see that this one is more donut shaped and this one is a little bit more rounded. And the problem when you make things on a donut shaped bead, if you look at these dots, that they are not really round. Of course, when I place them, they were round, and then I melt them in, and then they kind of go with the surface of the bead, and they are more oval than anything. And the problem with having an oval bead as your base is that it is very difficult to cover an oval dot with a round dot and not have like a bunch of white in this area. So, and also as you can see here, if I turn the bead, you can see that there's a difference, like this is a medium gap, then this is a very small gap, even smaller gap, and all of a sudden you have a really big gap. So you think, man, Karina fucked up, she didn't place her dot right. But this is something that happens, and I want to just start out with this idea, so that you can see, if you don't already know, what causes that. So get some flame going here, and and I use 1/16" mandrel for this because all my beads I just prefer to have a smaller hole. So on the first bead here, and I might only make one, I'm gonna make this kind of donut shaped bead and put my dots on top. So making the donut shaped bead means that you're basically staying on top of the initial footprint. And you don't want to make this bead too big because we add so many different layers later on that this bead can grow very fast. So got the glass on there, and I go, well, just melt it down, and I'm going to make it a little bit extreme. So I'm making a real strong donut bead. And for placing the dots, I use white stringer. You can see that the top one is a little bit thicker than the bottom one. So this is a small bead. Well, I'm going to use the thick one. This is just, you know, I want to show you why we don't do certain things, and the more, you know, the more pronounced they are, the more you make my point. So I'm placing my first dot, melt it off in the flame, then turn it up so that dot is on top. This is just the standard way of applying 4 dots. So, and one more. And yeah, this was not a good job because this last, you know, the last dot was a little, the gap between these two last dots were a little bit too big. So anyway, so now what I do is I'm just gonna melt these dots in, because whenever we put another color on top, of course we want to melt these dots in. And you know how it goes, sometimes you want to make a point, and every time you make it for yourself, by yourself, it works, and then when you do a demo it doesn't work. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So I'm melting these in, but I think I'm having a very good bad bead. So let it cool off a little bit. And now I'm taking my pointer, and you can see that these dots here, can you see? Yeah, these dots here are really close together, a little bit wider. This is even wider, and this is more wider. So what happens when you, even if you place your dots completely perfectly, you know, in the 4 corners, when you melt these dots down, first of all, because they cannot go sideways, there is no bead on the side, so there's really like kind of a small highway, and so these dots will pull into ovals because there's too much glass to stay around, so they have to go somewhere. They go oval, and depending on how you heat this, some of the dots will move this way and some of the dots move in the other way. So when you make 4 dots on a donut shaped bead, you pretty much get this, you know, so you have oval dots and you have very uneven intervals in between. So what can we do to prevent this? So now I'm gonna make the same type of bead. Oops, I only have 4 mandrels. So the first remedy is to make your bead a little bit wider, because then the dots have room to spread out sideways and not just go up and down the bead. So I'm making a small footprint like this, and typically I have my rod straight down, so I'm going sideways a little bit, not huge. So see now that I have a footprint almost twice what I had in the first bead. So I'm just kind of adding random blobs here. And in order to keep this bead round, so if you would just stay in the flame and just go back and forth, there's the rule that glass goes where the flame is the highest. So if you would just stay in the flame in the center, you would still end up with a donut-shaped bead because the glass goes in the center. So by moving right and left, the glass kind of stays where you put it. So we have a little bit rounder bead. Very nice. And now I'm taking I want to take a thinner stringer. So I have a whole bunch of stringer here in a jar. These two here that I had in the beginning, they were what you call it? You know, they were store-bought stringer. So now I want a smaller stringer because I'm gonna make smaller dots. So touch it in the center like that. Move it upwards. Dot number 2. Move that upwards. Dot number 3. And it's not great, so it's not my day for spacing. And one thing before I move on, I kind of look at the dots and see are they about the same size. Typically the first dot I placed, which I don't know which one this was a little bit smaller because my stringer isn't as hot yet. So the first dot is smaller and then they get consecutively larger because your stringer gets hotter. Now I'm taking a white string, and this is the trick that I'm very fond of. This one is a little bit small here. I will put a tiny bit more on this. This was probably the first one. So now I'm taking a white stringer, and it could be a little bit thinner. Good thing is I just have to look into my jar that is right there. So now I'm placing these small dots kind of on the shoulder. And if you remember, or if you've read this chapter in Passing the Flame, you know that I call these the buffer dots. And do the same on the left, just small dots. Now these dots will show up in the design. And if you don't want that, you could actually take black dots. Because what these dots do is that they kind of they prevent these dots from moving in the wrong direction. So it's very strange because you think, how can the small dots do so much? And in my collection of weird stories, which I will not bore you with, but this effect I call the sumo wrestler and his wife. So now I'm melting these in. And whenever I melt dots in, what I do is I hold the bead underneath the flame and I focus the flame on the dots. And I don't have the bead like in the flame like that, because you know, the more you hold the bead in the flame, the bead underneath will get hot, and there's a chance that everything will get out of control. So now here, if I turn that, well, I can't say this is perfect, but it should be perfect. So do as I say, not as I do. So now I'm taking a green, and you have to make a decision. One second, I have another sample bead that I made. Where did it go? Oh, yes. So now I'm going to keep this hot over there. And you see this sample bead. And if I turn it, I'm not sure you can see that. See how much white is still showing? So when you have that much white and you melt your green in, you will have a bead that has a white ring around it. And that's fine, but if you don't want that, you have to find a way of covering as much white as possible. And the trick for that is take your color, my green here, my transparent light green, and only heat the very tip of this. And then you push it down and pull it up and kind of wiggle a little bit, because you don't see, now you can see that I almost entirely covered the white. And the trick really is to have as little of this green as possible. So I'm pushing it down, pull up. And if you heat more on the screen, like let's say you heat all this and you push down, it's like the power to push down kind of disperses, if that's a word. And in my crazy stories, this is how I explain the fat lady and the chihuahua. So push down and almost all of the white is covered, as good as it's possible. So now I'm heating all this. Oh, and I should have started out with showing you the tools that I'm using, but yeah, you'll see when I get to it. So again, heat the bead, but the bead is underneath. You only heat the dots, and I go back and forth so that these dots cannot start spinning in one direction. So I always go one round this way and the other way. And one of the problems with beads that are based on 4 dots is, and I'm sure you know that already, is even when you melt these down, I'm going to take it out and show you. If you point it at you, you see that you get kind of a square bead, which makes sense because you're only putting mass on 4 corners, and that will give you a square bead. But when we poke these, it will go away. So I'm just melting in like 3/4 of a way. And now I have this. I'm going to show you. Hold this warm here. So I have these 3 pokers. One is kind of normal, one is super pointed, and one is very little pointed. And I'm not showing you these because I want to sell you this poker set of mine, because I'm out. I don't have any more, and my tool maker doesn't make any more. So let's say we would take the really pointed one, because a lot of pokers that I've seen that people use are very, very pointed. And this doesn't have to be tungsten at all. These here, you can actually make them yourself. They're kind of fairly thick mandrels, maybe the Pandora size, and you can just grind them on a little grinder that you can buy at Harbor Freight. So let's start with whatever, this one here. So the first way to poke, a lot of people do that, so you just heat, and then you go in there and you poke. See that? So this poke is not very deep because we only heated the surface of the green. So in order to go deeper and get a more pronounced bubble, you have to heat this dot so that the glass underneath gets hot as well. So the way to do that is you don't just heat it, you don't just put it in the flame, because then it will just all go haywire. So I'm pointing the dot downwards because the flame comes from down here. So I heat, I take it out. I heat, take it out. Heat, and though the heat will sink in as you're taking it out. So heat, and then I'm poking that. See, these pokes are a little bit sideways because I usually place my mandrel kind of on the top of the torch, but I can't do that here. So we have that, and now I'm going to take this poker, and again I'm going to heat, So the further you get along in the bead, the less you have to heat, because there is still previous heat in it. So I'm heating, and now I'm waiting a little bit, and then I'm poking. So in my stories, I should write a storybook. In my stories, this whole endeavor here is called Jose is drunk at the hotel. So I might tell you someday what that means. So we have one more left, and I'm taking this kind of poker, so a very blunt poker, and I'm heating, and then I'm just taking this blunt poker and I'm going to bend the metal. So I'm pushing in. You can see that here you have almost like a mechanical hole that you're creating, because this thing makes the hole. So now we're going to put some clear on. Oh no, I totally forgot. I wanted to put some of the aqua in there. So I would have just put a little dot of aqua before I poked. So I'm not going to make another bead, because I'm sure you guys all understand what I'm meaning. So place some clear. I'm trying to get about the same amount of clear on top. And when I have a full rod and I melt the dot off, I always kind of like wiggle like this, otherwise you will end up with too much glass on this. So it's not the best bead, but you get the idea. So melt these in, and then we can look at each different poke and see what the difference is. And you know, I'm not saying this one is bad. Well, I'm thinking this one is bad, but I'm not saying it. So you can make up your own mind what you like best. So melting these. See, now I'm having the bead in the flame, because I just wanted to go back to a more or less round bead. So I have to heat the entire bead. So I can turn this off. And I hope that this microphone thing that I got. So you have to just wait a little bit to for this to cool off enough that you can see what's happening. So let's see. Let's find the first one that I did. And I think now it's cool enough. So the first one, you can see that, let me see how close I can get, and this is still focusing. So the first one is just a tiny, tiny bubble. And maybe if I turn it like this, you can see that there's no depth to the bubble, because the bead was not hot enough underneath. So if you just wanted a tiny bubble that kind of hovering on the surface, that's what you would do. The second one is where I heated the dot all the way down into the bead, and what I did is, when the whole thing was hot, I immediately went in, and that's pretty pretty. So this one here, this is probably something that you would need to see in person to see the difference between this and this. But with this one, I heated the whole dot, and then I waited a little bit. I waited a few seconds. So what happens is, when you wait, the surface of the glass will create what they call it like surface tension. And when you poke in, you're taking the surface with it. On this one here, the surface was very, very hot, so you're kind of poking through the surface into the bead. And here it's like taking the surface with you. So this one gives you, see, like it gives you almost maximum depth in this. And the one where I used this tool here has depth, but it doesn't have the depth of the bubble. So I don't know how to describe it. This is almost like in between the first one and these other two. So this might be depending on, let's say you wanted to make an owl or something, you know, like, so if you hold your bead like this, you can kind of see it's like, oh yeah, this is an owl. You just make like a nose and a body and something. And you might want to have a smaller bubble for your owl and not these like very pronounced bubbles with the ring around. So that's about it. So there might be there's like many basic techniques. They're really easy to do, but there is oftentimes more to it than meets the eye, and so understanding the glass and what happens is always a good idea. So I hope this helped you out a little bit, and so this would be probably a promotional video for my passing the flame in action class, if that will ever happen. But so this is the beginner's technique that also, as a more accomplished bead maker, you can maybe benefit from a little bit. So thank you very much, and I'll see you for my next demo.